Right. Very good morning, everybody. Are we live? Let me just check if we're live. Right. I think we are live. All right. Very, right. Very good morning, everybody. Very good morning. Welcome to the lesson for the day. Today, we're going to be talking about parajumbles, right? And quite a few things pertaining to parajumbles. I've curated a set of questions for us to go over today, right? So that's what we're going to be doing. Just give me a minute. Let me sort all these things out. Just 1 minute. Yeah. So before we jump into the questions that I've curated for us, allow me to give you a very small introduction of the Unacademy portal, the Unacademy platform. Unacademy, as you know, is India's largest learning platform today when it comes to preparing for any and every competitive exam. This YouTube channel is particularly for management exams like your CAT, GMAT, NMAT, ZAT, and the likes. Right. Um, I am Prankur Arora. I'm going to be your instructor on this journey. I'll be taking you through various aspects of verbal ability as well as reading comprehension. That's what I am here for. I've been in the learning industry for the past couple of years, where I've even had the opportunity to consult for various organizations like Interglobe, Marico, Becton Dickinson, FMC Corp, um, different organizations, different kinds of functional areas that I addressed in in each and every organization. I am also a published author. I wrote this book called "It's Not Funny." Got published a couple of years back by Pepperscript. Um, so it's a work of satirical fiction, right? So if you're fond of reading, if you're fond of fiction, or if you're fond of dark satirical humor, then be sure to check it out. It was even recognized by and positively reviewed by the likes of Papa CJ, Biswapati Sarkar, comedy legends in our country. I also hold advanced certifications facilitation from an American organization called Leadership Management International. LMI is perhaps the world's largest organization working in the space of transformational leadership. And I've been running this production house called Tamasha Entertainment based out of Gurgaon. So yeah, that's where we curate a lot of theatrical and film experiences. So why Unacademy stands out is because of two reasons. One reason is the pedagogy that Unacademy follows. Where we give you access to daily life classes, where all kinds of interaction between the learners and the educators. It happens in real time. Then there's the proposition of live tests and quizzes. Now the idea is that you can evaluate your performance with regular tests and quizzes, and get detailed analysis on the same. Right? What do I mean by detailed analysis? I mean giving you data points like the time you're spending on every question, or your topic wise scores, section wise scores, stuff like that. Plus, all the courses on the platform are pretty much structured. They are in line with the exam syllabus and audited by subject matter experts, created by credible people who've been working in this domain for a long time. um, Now, the idea is that with one subscription, you get access to anything and everything on the platform. All kinds of live and recorded courses that you can access from the comfort of any of your devices. As I was saying, there are so many educators on the platform, and all these educators, they're credible people, highly credible people who, successfully mentored thousands and thousands of aspirants into various top tier business schools, like be it your IIMs, MDIs, XLRIs, ISBs, you name it, they've cracked it. Um, you can experience all these oh, hi Samya, very good morning, very good morning. You can experience all these live classes for free. New batches, new courses, they keep on coming up on the platform too. Plus, language is never a barrier because we've got educators who teach in vernacular languages as well, right? So, if you're not as comfortable in English, I'm pretty sure you can find someone who's going to be teaching in the same regional language that you were brought up on. uh, Very cool thing is that you design your own schedule when it comes to your curriculum, your learning journey. You decide what are the kind of courses you want to enroll into, who are the kind of educators you want to be learning from. You decide all that. No one else is taking the ownership of your learning journey. So that's a really, really cool thing according to me. uh, Plus, as I was saying, all interaction on the platform, it happens in real time. All discussions, doubt clearing, and even the question answers, we conduct them in the form of live polls. So you participate in live polls and you compete for a place on the leaderboard, which is again visible to anybody and everybody who is a part of that lesson. This I already talked about, how we give you detailed, in-depth insights basically on any and every exam, any and every quiz that you appear for when it comes to the subscription platform. And another important thing is that you'll see that I'll be scribbling a lot of things on these class notes. So these class notes with educator annotations, they're made available to you once you subscribe to the platform. Talking of subscription, these are the various models that Unacademy makes available for you. You can clearly see that as the time period of the subscription goes up, the cost of the subscription per month is going down dramatically. So I would recommend that you opt in for a longer learning journey, right? Why? Because uh, understand uh, that preparing for a competitive exam, it is a long undertaking. It is a huge undertaking, right? So you have to be conscious of what you're doing. You have to give yourself that time, that gestation period, to develop the comfort level with the subject, with the educators, as well as with the pedagogy that you're following. Because understand, these are the COVID times, right? There is no physical learning happening. Everything is virtual, right? So you've got to give yourself that gestation period. So I would recommend that you go in for a 6 month, at least a 6 month or a 12 month journey. Having said that, regardless of the subscription that you go for, if you use my name Prankur as your referral code, you get an extra 10% off. Hi Shubhecha, Soumya, I'm glad you received this. I'm glad you received it. Right, so let's begin with the question for the day. This is the first question. Uh, Take some time, solve it, hit me up on the chat with your answer, and then we'll discuss it. Yeah, Soumya says 3. Alright, let's wait for another answer. Right, we have 5 people attending this class. Let's see if we get another answer for a minute and then we'll discuss this. 3 and 4. All right. Let's quickly read these sentences. Right. It conceived of the gods as blissful and immortal, yet material, beings made of atoms inhabiting the empty spaces between worlds in the vastness of infinite space, too far away from Earth to have any interest in what man was doing. In modern popular usage, an epicure is a connoisseur of the arts of life and the refinements of sensual pleasures, especially of good food and drink, attributable to a misunderstanding of the Epicurean doctrine as promulgated by Christian polemicists. Can be argued that the philosophy is atheistic on a practical level but avoids the charge of atheism on the theoretical level, thus avoiding the fate of Socrates, who was tried and executed for the atheism of his beliefs. Epicureanism emphasizes the neutrality of the gods and their non interference with human lives, although it did not deny the existence of gods despite some tendencies. So, we can clearly see that the opening sentence for the paragraph will either be D or B, right? Why do I say that? I say that because understand that sentences A and C, they're beginning with it, right? They're beginning with it, right? So these pronouns, they have to have targets before in the paragraph. So that is why, Samya, I'll eliminate options 2 and 3 right away, because these two begin with it. But what is the target of it? What is it referring to? Right? It is a question mark. I need a reference for that earlier in my paragraph. Right? So that is why I'll eliminate options 2 and 3 right away. Now I am left with only options 1 and 4, and the both tell me that the paragraph has to begin with D. Right? Epicureanism emphasizes the neutrality of the gods and their non interference with human lives, although it did not deny the existence of gods despite some tendencies towards atheism. Now I know for a fact that either sentence A or sentence B will come after sentence D, right? And the both of them, one has an it, right? One has it, and the other is talking about in modern popular usage, and Epicure is a connoisseur of the arts, right? So I am talking about Epicureanism emphasizes neutrality of the gods. Here, Shubhechha, I'll probably go with sentence A after D. Why? Because the A in D, the A, rather the it in A, it is referring to Epicureanism. It conceived of the gods as blissful and immortal, yet material beings made of atoms inhabiting the empty spaces. Right? So A will follow D. Why? Because the it here refers to Epicureanism. Does that make sense? Epicureanism emphasizes the neutrality of the gods, right, and their non-interference. Although it did not deny the existence, despite some tendencies towards atheism, it conceived of the gods as blissful and immortal. So we are continuing to talk about gods, and it here refers to Epicureanism, right? So it will be D A, and the only option giving us that is option number one, D A C B. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Right. Let's move on to the next question. Because Chubecha says 1, Soumya says 2. Alright, let's look at it. Um, let's read all the sentences, right, one by one. The most contentious part of all this is the definition of justification, and there are several schools of thought on the subject. According to evidentialism, what makes a belief justified in this sense is the possession of evidence. A belief is justified to the extent that it fits a person's evidence. Different varieties of reliabilism suggest that either justification is not necessary for knowledge, provided it is a reliably produced true belief, or justification is required by any reliable cognitive process is sufficient justification. Yet another school, infallibilism, holds that a belief must not only be true and justified, but that the justification of the belief must necessitate its truth, so that the justification for the belief must be infallible. Guys, understand what is the paragraph doing? The paragraph is giving you different schools of thought on the definition of justification, right? There is one school of thought which is evidentialism, then there is reliabilism, and then there is infallibilism, right? So I am not able to understand why the two of you think the paragraph should begin with B, because B is giving us one school of thought. How about the paragraph begins with A, where we are saying, you know what, there are three schools of thought. One is evidentialism, then there's reliabilism, then there's infallibilism, right? So when I'm saying that there are three schools of thought, the first sentence of the paragraph should lay that down, right? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Right? The paragraph should begin with A. Why? Because A is saying, you know what, there are several schools of thought. One school of thought is evidentialism, then there's reliabilism, there's yet another school of thought called infallibilism. Right? So, yes, A, B, C, D, Samya is, it may be 3, nahi, it is 3. Why? Because we were left with two options where it begins with A. Right? हमने पहले 1 और 2 को eliminate कर दिया. Now we are left with two options. One is A, B, C, D, the other is A, B, D, C. Now D begins with yet another school, right? So yet another school is a transition. It's not a transitionary phrase, right? D cannot exist between B and C. We'll have B, we'll have C, and then we have D, where it says, you know, there's yet another school which is infallibilism, right? D can't get sandwiched between B and C because of how it is constructed. So that is why A, B, C, D is the correct answer, right? Let's move on to the next question. Yes, the para was not jumbled. That's another trick, right? Okay. Samya says 1. Let's wait for Shubhecha. Shubhecha says 4. Alright. Let's look at it. Comments have the potential to turn a news website into a democratic polyphony, but there's also a danger of its descending to cacophony if readers do not express opinions in a language that behooves uh, the requirements of a matured public sphere. It can become a site for multiple concurrent debates, for registering dissent, for pursuing an idea, and finally for building a polity of informed choices. The role of the moderators is to retain the space for polyphony and reject voices that breed cacophony. Right. So we know for a fact what is the paragraph talking about. The paragraph is talking about how a website can turn into something ugly and what we can do to prevent that. Right. The resolution for it is also mentioned. So I agree to the both of you that this paragraph should begin with sentence A, because the first option, the fourth option, both of them begin with sentence A. A lays down the context, right? Context of the paragraph. Comments have the potential to turn a news website into a democratic polyphony, right? After which, Soumya, I think we need to have C. Why? Because this it refers to the website. This it refers to the website. It can become a site for multiple concurrent debates, for registering dissent, for pursuing an idea, and finally for building a polity of informed choices. Then it talks about danger. What is the danger for the website? But there is also danger of descending to cacophony. And finally, we have D, which talks about resolution, how we can prevent that from happening. That the role of the moderators, it is to retain the space for polyphony and reject voices that breed cacophony. So I think that's where Shubhecha has gotten this right. ACBD is the correct flow, right? One is we are laying down what the website is about, what it has potential for. Then we talk about multiple concurrent debates, that it can become this. Then we talk about the danger, the negative, and then we talk about the solution. So, meaning wise, there is a proper flow, right? So, that is why I would rather go with ACBD over ADBC. Alright, next question. Okay, Shubesha says it's option 3. Soumya, do we have your answer too? Uh, Soumya, are you still working on it, or can we look into the explanation? Alright, let's flow into the explanation now. So, I think you've gotten this right, Shubecha. It is option 3, DBCA, is what the flow will be like. There was a trick to solving it. Uh, if you looked at it closely, the idea was that D and B, they are linked together. Why? Because the both of them are talking about packages. And then we have C and A, they are linked together. Why? Because the both of them are talking about performance, right? These were the two links, and you had to figure out which should come first, which should come next. And also the idea was that since they had to be together, the only option that is giving us that is option 3, right? Top management compensation packages guarantee a high level of pay, but are often only weakly linked to the performance of the firm related to its industry. It seems counterintuitive then that the company boards and shareholders must approve those packages. What packages? Compensation packages. Then there are C and A, which are linked. A close look, however, indicates that by endorsing performance incentive compensation, broadly diversified investors are indeed incentivizing CEOs for good performance, except that the performance that they're rewarding is industry performance, not company performance, right? So these two these two links were kind of based on what the main subject of the sentence in both these cases was. So that's where DBCA becomes like the most viable answer option. Next question. 4. Okay. It's not hard to see why this might be. We can clearly know for a fact that this cannot be the opening or the closing of the sentence. This has to be a transitionary sentence. It's not hard to see why this might be. To many, political lobbying is seen as a way to advance special interests at the expense of the greater good. Right? Now, so when it comes to lobbying, so is again a transitionary sentence. Why? Because this has to refer to something else. This so has to refer to something else. It has to have a callback. So when it comes to lobbying on climate change, uh, The prevailing public view is that most firms lobby against climate regulations because greater regulation threatens industry. Consider the US Chamber of Commerce, the country's largest lobbying organization, which spent over 90 million against climate change legislation in uh, 2014. That same year, one of the highest polluting utilities, Southern Company, spent an estimated 9 million on climate change lobbying. Right. So, Shubhecha, uh, what is the paragraph going to be about? Think broadly about what the paragraph could be about, right? The paragraph is about how political lobbying is expensive, and it is used to advance special interests. There was this example of climate change where some companies spent a lot of money to lobby against climate change. There was the US Chamber of Commerce, the largest lobbying organization, that spent this much money, right? So the idea is there is a paragraph talking about political lobbying, and then there is an example for the US Chamber of Commerce in Southern California and Southern Company, right? That is why I would not go for these two options. Why? Because they're beginning with the example. How can a paragraph begin with an example? First, there has to be context, there has to be some detailing, then there has to be an example. Alright? So that is why I think the paragraph should begin with B. To many, political lobbying is seen as a way to advance special interests. So, when it comes to lobbying on climate change, the prevailing public view is that most firms lobby against climate resolutions because regulation threatens industry. It's not hard to see. This is now the transitionary sentence in the paragraph. It's not hard to see why this might be. And then there is the example. Consider the US Chamber of Commerce. That same year, another thing happened. We are talking about US Chamber of Commerce in 2014. That same year is referring to what? Referring to 2014, right? That same year is referring to 2014. So both these sentences also have to go together, and E has to follow D, right? So BCADE therefore is the best answer option available to us. Next question. Okay, Soumya says it's 2. Alright. Becha says it's 1. Okay. As Alexander said, gifted leaders do not just gather information, they actively exploit and manipulate the assumptions of the other side. Hannibal of the Alps did not have better information than did the marauding Mongols. Knowing that assumption, Hannibal had all that was necessary to surprise the enemy and overwhelm them. One thing that Hannibal of the Alps knew was that the Mongols absolutely assumed that nobody would attack Azaria from the desert, as to do so would be simply suicidal. You may lack for capital or manpower, but who knows what insane information the opposition might be working from. Now, one thing that we can basically figure out is that D and C, they have to be linked, and C will follow D. Why? Because D is talking about how the Mongols absolutely assumed that nobody would attack Azaria. Knowing that assumption, Hannibal had all that was necessary to surprise the enemy and overwhelm them, right? So C will follow D because C is referring to the assumption that D talks about, right? So DC has to be the order. Let's all our answer options also have DC, right? So that is one thing that we can be sure of. Now, where does DC come in? Should DC come in the beginning? Should it come towards the end? Right? Now, just like the previous one, let's look at whether you know this entire paragraph is about Hannibal and the Mongols, or is there some context setting and then there is an example of these guys, right? You may lack for capital or manpower, but who knows what insane information the opposition might be working from. So the idea is, if you guys attended my previous lessons on Parajumbles, the introductory sentence, the intro sentence never talks about anything specific. Alright, the introductory sentence is basically to set context, to build the premise, right? And then later in the paragraph, sentences 2, 3, 4, it's the job of those three sentences to give you specific details. And finally, the fifth one is the concluding sentence, right? So the introductory sentence always gives general information. It never gives specific information, right? That is why I would rather my sentence begins with E over A and B, because A and B are talking about specific things. E is setting context that you may lack for capital or manpower, but who knows what insane information the opposition might be working from. Now, what insane information? As Alexander said, gifted leaders do not just gather information, they actively exploit and manipulate the assumptions of the other side. So, A is developing on what E talks about in terms of insane information. So, E and A are also linked like that. E will come first. A follows E. Why? Because A is talking about gathering information and working on assumptions. E is setting context for insane information, right? So EA, they have to go together as well. Now, because I know EA have to go together, I'll eliminate this. I have this and this. And I would rather E become my introductory sentence. Why? Because E is setting context, right? So that is why I would go with the third one where I have E and A together and DC together, right? Now, BCD are the example. If you closely look at it, Hannibal of the Alps did not have better information than marauding Mongols. Knowing that assumption, Hannibal had all that was necessary to surprise the enemy. One thing that Hannibal knew was that Mongols absolutely assumed that nobody would attack Azaria from the desert to do. So BDC is basically the example that this paragraph is using. We are talking about insane information, we are talking about gathering information and using assumptions. BDC is basically giving you an example of the same. How Hannibal did this against the marauding Mongols, right? So let's move on to the next question now. Okay. Samya says option 1. Alright. Subesha says 1 as well. Right. So let's look at it. This face off, what face off are we talking about? This face off will continue for several months given the strong convictions on either side. What sides? Says a senior functionary of the high powered task force on drought. Okay. During the past week and a half, the central government has sought to deny some of the earlier apprehensions over the impact of drought. The recent revival of the rains had led to the emergence of a line of divide between the two. What two are we talking about? The state governments, on the other hand, allege that the center is downplaying the crisis only to evade its full responsibility of financial assistance that is required to alleviate the damage. Shrill alarm about the economic impact of an inadequate monsoon had been sounded by the center as well as most of the states in late July and early August. So, yes, the both of you got this right that the sentence should begin with E, right? What should come after E? After E, Soumya and Shubhecha, look at the recent revival of the rains had led to the emergence of a line of divide between the two. This two is referring to center as well as the states. E ke baad we need C. Why? Because B and D are linked. During the past week and a half, the central government has sought to deny this. B and D are linked. B is talking about center and D is talking about states on the other hand. Alright. B and D they have to go together. B is talking about center. State is talking about states on the other hand. Allege that the center is downplaying the crisis. So we know for a fact that BD have to go together. This does not have BD. This has DB in the opposite order. This has BD, this has BD. Now I also know that E and C kind of are linked because E is talking about center as well as most of the states and line of divide between the two. This too refers to center and the state, right? So I know EC and then I know BD have to they are together and then this A is like the concluding statement that this face off will continue for several months given the strong convictions on either side. We said what center is doing, we know what state is doing on the other hand, and then we are saying that given the strong convictions this face off can continue for several months, right? So EC BDA is like the most appropriate order or rearrangement for this one. Okay, I hope you understood this. Let's move on to the next question. Soumya, keep on practicing, don't lose hope. It's okay. There are days when you get things wrong, it's alright. Don't lose heart. Just keep practicing. The more you practice, the better you're gonna get. See, the best way to go about Parajumbles is that try to develop your skill on forming links between sentences. Once you know how those links are formed and what sentence will go with what sentence, then it becomes relatively easier to boil down to the options. So even when you're practicing, do conscious practice where you're doing one thing at a time. If you're working on parajumbles, in parajumbles do one thing, which is form links, right? So solve 5 questions where you're only forming links. Then solve 5 questions where you're trying to figure out what can be the beginning and what can be the conclusion. Practice like that. Very specific things. Okay, Shubhecha says it's 4. Alright. Soumya, do you have an answer for this one? 4. Okay. Uh, the book was Jonah Lehrer's How We Decide, and the epiphany was that consciousness could reside in the brain. He was a 20-year-old philosophy major at Hamilton College. In January 2010, while driving from Chicago to Minneapolis, Sam Cleary played an audiobook and had an epiphany. The quest for an empirical understanding of consciousness has long preoccupied neurobiologists. The standard coursework, ancient, modern, and contemporary philosophy enthralled him, but McNerney was no neurobiologist. So, a hint to solving this is that, we have quite a lot of sentences that are using pronouns like he, right? Then there is but McNerney. So, we know for a fact, B, F, uh, E, here we are using him. These will come later into the paragraph. First we need to have the subject, right? And C is giving us that subject, that in January 2010, while driving from Chicago to Minneapolis, Sam McNerney played an audiobook and had an epiphany. Setting context, talking about McNerney, talking about book, talking about epiphany. The book was Jonah Lear's How We Decide, and the epiphany was that consciousness could reside in the brain. So A and C, they go together, and A follows C. Why? Because A is talking about the epiphany that C mentioned, right? A is expanding on it. Then we have right. So we have A follows C, right? Now we can eliminate option 1. We have these 3 left. After A, we either have D or we have F. But McNerney was no neurobiologist. That this cannot go after A because we've not even talked about neurobiology yet, right? So we can eliminate 2 and 3 right away because F can never follow A because we've not talked about neurobiology. So how can we say McNerney was no neurobiologist? What is this but for, right? So we need D. The quest for an empirical understanding of consciousness has long preoccupied neurobiologists. Then we'll have F, but McNerney was no neurobiologist. Now we know there is a callback for F, right? There is a callback. There is context to talk about neurobiology. And finally, we'll have B and E, that he was 20-year-old philosophy major and that he was interested in everything, right? So C, A, D, F, B, E is the most logical rearrangement here. Good job. Next question. Okay. All right. So, just like there's the rule with pronouns that you need to have subject first. You have to have the noun or the noun phrase in your sentence during the opening, during the introduction, and then the pronouns in other sentences follow. You cannot begin your paragraph with a pronoun. Similarly, guys, when it comes to names, you need to have full names in your sentence first, right? Then you can use the first name or the second name to basically talk about the same individual. But first, in your paragraph, you need to have the full name of the individual. Only then later on in the paragraph you can either refer to Karl Marx as only Karl or only Marx, right? So the only trick to solving this one was that 3 is giving me the full name and sentence 2 is giving me only the half name, right? Half name cannot go before full name. We need to have 3 in our paragraph first, and then we'll have sentence 2 in our paragraph. But first we need to talk about Karl Marx as Karl Marx, then we can refer to Karl Marx as either Marx or Karl, right? All these options have sentence 2 first and then sentence 3, sentence 2 and then sentence 3, sentence 2 and then sentence 3. No, the only option where I have Karl Marx first is sentence 3, is option D, where I'm saying if Karl Marx was alive today, he would say that television is the opiate of the people. Marx thought that religion was the opiate because it soothed people's pain and suffering and prevented them from rising in rebellion. Television and similar entertainments are even more of an opiate because of their addictive tendencies. If you are used to having your simulation coming from outside, your mind never develops its own habits of thinking and reflecting. So these are simple rules about Parajumbles, you guys. Go through my introductory video on Parajumbles. I think I took that lesson, 3-4 days back, right? The very first video on Parajumbles. Go through it. I go through all these rules where in sentences, सबसे पहले you need to have a noun, and then later on in the paragraph you can refer to them through your pronoun. Similarly, you need to have the full name first, and then you can use either the first name or the second name. You need to have the full name first, and then you can use acronym, right? Acronyms cannot go before full names. Similarly, first name or second name cannot go before full names. All right. Next question. Alright, guys, look at this. By the time he got to Lingeflu, what is he referring to? At SAS, he arrived at a time crisis. What is he referring to? This book is chock-a-block full of intrusive stories and practical advice describing Carton's activities and wing research, where he assumed. What is this he referring to? He is referring to Carton, right? He began again. We are beginning with the pronoun. As I mentioned right now, that when it comes to all of this, okay, Shubhecha says it's C. Alright, let's look at C. The idea is that your paragraph has to begin with sentence 3 because that is the only sentence that has a noun, right? All the others are beginning with pronouns. So we'll eliminate A and B right away. We have 3214 or 3412. Carton's activities at Wingresser, then Lingeflug, and then SAS in particular. Right? So they are talking about activities at three different places: Wingresser, Lingeflug, and SAS. Right? So maybe it makes sense to follow the same order where I begin with 3 and then I go to sentence 4. He began. Look at the chronology. He began at Wingresser as an order giver, not a listener, neither to his people nor to his customers, and made every mistake in the book. By the time he got to Lingeflug, follow the chronology. By the time he went to Lingeflug, 4 years later, he'd learned many lessons. In fact, he began his second stint as top dog by calling the entire company together in a hangar and asking for help, a far cry from his barking out commands just 48 months back. And then at SAS, he arrived at a time crisis. Right? So 3412 therefore is the most viable answer option for this one. Okay. With this, we come to the end of the lesson today. Thank you so much for joining in. I hope you had fun solving so many questions of Parajumbles. If you guys are available tomorrow, I'm going to take another class at 10 a.m. So if there is any specific topic that you want me to address, I can take up that lesson, or I'll continue with Parajumbles, whatever it is you guys want to study. If you will attend the class at 10 a.m., you can tell me the topics that you want to study. If there's anything specific, then just let me know on the chat. Shubhecha, Soumya, do you have anything specific in mind? What do you want to study? Alright, then I'll continue with Parajumbles practice tomorrow at 10 a.m. as well. I hope you guys join me tomorrow too. Till then, stay safe, stay strong, and stay mellow. I'll see you.